Thanks.
All right, so we'll jump right into item P 9.1. This is from Mary. I don't see Mary on the line. Let me pull up her proposal. Shauna, since you're a subject matter expert, do you want to give us a recap of this, since it'll be unbiased on this proposal?
Sure. So we had been listening to this proposal last time. What this was doing was changing the reference standards to be more in line with the corrected standards. So it's changing the reference standards in the IMC, but it's also changing them in the IRC. When we talked last time, we talked about how what they're changing in the IMC as far as the reference standard is in line with what's going in 2024 IMC, and it matches perfectly. So there's no big deal there, other than do we need to update any language in the IMC so that the language matches the actual standard. And then, but we did talk about the 2024 IRC standard is not the same. And so the proponents had agreed that they are happy to change their IRC standards to match what was in the 2024, just bringing back that that C22.2, which they took out, but actually got brought back. So those all were not too big of issues. Well, the reason we ended up tabling the item was because if you scroll down to the actual language in that's in the code right now, this is a proposed amendment, which wasn't there before. But if you look at the language that's in the code right now, it's really talking about, we'll use this chapter and chapter 15, and then ASHRAE 15. But this code 2021 doesn't do a great job of talking about those A2L refrigerants, where the 2024 does and ASHRAE 15 does. So there was confusion about, should we bring in a 2024 standard when the language doesn't match it? But at the same time, we really like the wording in ASHRAE 15, and Denver was using ASHRAE 15 a lot. So they wanted the ability to use ASHRAE 15 to cover those A2L refrigerants. So what you see before you is now an amendment that will allow you to use those A2L refrigerants by the new underlying language, just a little bit higher. I think this is the one right there. Right there, we add an exception to 1101.1.1 that now says if you're using A2L refrigerants, then you comply with ASHRAE 15 first, and then you only comply with this chapter for those things not covered in ASHRAE 15. So that gives Denver the option to use ASHRAE 15 that really more in depth covers those refrigerants. So that was it. I think that this amendment doesn't bring back those 2024 standards. So we would have to actually also take a vote on that, I think, maybe as a separate amendment. We introduced it last time to bring in the standards to match the 2024 and to match ASHRAE 15, since they're going to use ASHRAE 15. I showed them last week, and I can show them again this time if you want. But that's just kind of a brief summary. What we tabled it, we were concerned, is there issues with the fire code and any kind of between fire code, building code, mechanical? Is there any issue? Is there an issue having wording on the 2021 but referencing the 2024? So that's what we're trying to cover here. I think that probably Charles and some others might have additional comments.
Okay, thanks, Shauna, for the summary and recap of where we left off last time on this one. Because we already had the opportunity for public input and such, we will not do that for this particular proposal. So we'll jump straight into the discussion portion from the committee members. So committee, this is your opportunity to have further discussion, ask any further questions, or to make a motion. Chuck, go ahead.
Yes, thanks, Kevin. I wanted to add a little bit to what Shauna was saying. In the last 2 weeks, we did look into the 2024 proposals. Shauna was able to round those up for us, and there is some amendments to the fire code and building code regarding the maximum allowable quantities and how these refrigerants are going to be handled specifically. And I have discussed those amendments with Eric Browning and Tony Carroll with the fire department. Well, Eric Browning, the building official, Tony Carroll with the fire department. And both are agreeable to pull that 2024 language forward to their codes, but their code committee hearings are reaching an end, and they don't really have the bandwidth to hear these additional proposals. So if this committee moves this forward, know that the 2024 language for the IFC and IBC will be most likely moved forward outside of committee to the building code and fire code. So pretty much most of the language from the 2024 I codes will be moved forward regarding A2L refrigerants.
Can I ask a question? Chuck, if you do that, do we still need this exception?
It depends.
Okay.
If because there's two options, and I think it would be interesting because either we can move all the language from 2024 IMC forward, or we can leave this exception because the IFC and IBC will be independent of that decision. That's a separate conversation. But for the mechanical code, most of the language for A2L refrigerants was pulled from ASHRAE and designed to be consistent with ASHRAE. And so by us just allowing the use of ASHRAE, I think we cover our bases. But there would be part of the due diligence of moving the 2024 language forward in IBC and IFC would also be looking at the 2024 mechanical amendments and making sure that we don't need to also pull those forward. And I don't think we changed the intent of the code by going either way. If we decide to use just this exception to allow ASHRAE, or if we pull the 2024 amendments forward. It's just kind of late in the game for everybody to review all those proposals. I think there's 7 for mechanical. There was a group.
Okay, committee, any other further discussion, questions, comments, concerns? Anybody want to make a motion? Too early? Any hands going up? Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I think that this should work out. Like you said, I'm looking at the 2021 fire code, and I don't see anything that would absolutely conflict with what's going on here. Because when it gets in, there it is, flammable refrigerants. Well, it could get interesting. But I understand the desire here is that it's intended to work out well so that it meets the ASHRAE 15. It's interesting that the fire department would they, I guess, defer to ASHRAE 15, where it starts talking about things. This is where the flammability requirements come in. ASHRAE 15 definitely talks about either a boatload of ventilation or class 1 div 2 electrical installation. I would think that that's sufficient for the fire department to review. I guess that's it. I'm not sure what that is. Is that a question or a comment? But
No, and Mark, I agree. There is, and so Tony yesterday read the amendment in the for the 2024 IFC committee in chapter 50. And so he understood what they were, how they were pulling this in and using it. And we also looked at chapter 6 of the fire code with detection and refrigerants.
right.
And it specifically points the fire department to the mechanical code and the ASHRAE 15. So I think we felt comfortable with that direct correlation, and with the amendment made to the 2024 IFC flammability maximum allowable quantities that, I mean, obviously this was all kind of late breaking. We're going to do our due diligence, but at the national level, these proposals went through pretty unanimously and as submitted. It didn't appear that there was any controversy at the national level adopting these.
Is there any procedural issues? You mentioned that it's not going to be able to go through the actual committee process, possibly. If we were to wrap in the 2024 IFC and IBC, just procedurally, how would that be done? Can that be done at at the task force level, at the compilation task force level?
I can't speak specifically how it would go through. I know Eric said, well, it just may not be going through committee. So it might be something that just, like if city council adopts an ordinance, we have to adopt that language in our amendments, and it doesn't go through committee for consideration. It just gets put in. And this might be something that happens similarly, that we look at the 2024 language, we do our due diligence, reach out to this group if there's any question, maybe offline through an email chain or something, and try to come to a consensus if there's any questions. But it it probably will not be going through a committee hearing like this.
I think what I would recommend, just because I would hope, unfortunately it is occurring so quickly, I don't think anyone's actually vetted this yet, but at least not on this committee. I would hope that by adopting all of the ICC related language in the various codes, that it becomes fairly well coordinated. ICC has been known not to necessarily catch all the conflicts, but that would be the best way to approach this, would be to bring all the 2024 language in each of the codes forward. Yes. Having said that, I think ASHRAE 15, everybody is looking at ASHRAE 15. I think that by using ASHRAE 15, I'm going to say you got 98% of the bases covered, and perhaps any missing details can be developed in policy? Question mark.
Yeah, if there was something missing, for sure we would address it.
So that makes me feel good about just doing this. Is that you do a pretty good job of establishing and documenting policies, and I hope that ICC well coordinated those 3 documents.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Anybody want to make a motion? Is anybody uncomfortable with this one?
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the original proposal as modified with this amendment for the exception to use ASHRAE 15, with the understanding that we may end up pulling all the mechanical proposals from 2024 forward if needed. But for now, I think it's just this move to approve this proposal as modified with the exception to allow the use of ASHRAE 15 for A2L refrigerants.
Okay.
So not a huge jump. The bottom tunnel.
Is there a second?
That comes out the bottom, at the end of the bottom. Yeah.
Second.
Okay, Mark seconds. All right. Any further, so there's a motion to approve as written on the screen, but just for clerical purposes, there was a modification between the last time we heard the proposal and this time, which is adding this exception. Before I call a vote, Shauna has her hand up, so let's go to Shauna.
I just want to, I agree that with this proposal and this amendment, the reference standards will be covered because because the IMC covered the right reference standard and so does ASHRAE 90 or ASHRAE 15. When you're talking about buildings done under the IMC, I guess my question is just if you're going to bring over the language in the other codes, maybe, do we still need to change the reference to the IRC because those do not match the 2024?
Yeah, I would, because the proponent agreed to align those, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree that if the proponent agreed to do the 2024 IRC reference standards to align with what was adopted nationally, then we should as well.
Okay, so maybe you could further modify to just include the approved 2024 IRC reference standards.
Of course. So I make a motion to approve this proposal with the modification to add the exception to use ASHRAE 15 for A2L refrigerants, and then bring the reference standard language from the 2024 IRC that was adopted nationally.
Let's get that in there. Yeah.
Okay, and Mark, you're okay with that?
And yes, I concur with the second.
Okay, great. So any other further discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll go to Erica one last time. Since we had some more people join, I want to make sure we got the right number of voting members. So when we count, we have that. Erica, can you tell us how many voting members we have in attendance and if you want to do a final roll call?
Yeah, we actually have all 10 voting members in attendance. So
all right,
6 for this to pass.
Awesome. Great. Thanks everybody for being here. All right, so I'm going to lower all the hands before I call a vote. So the motion on the table is to approve as written on the screen with the further intent to bring in the approved language from the 2024 IRC reference standards. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I'll do a count. We have 9. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Don't see any. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Any. Okay, so that passes. Let's move on to the next one. Next item of business is item 67, which Kristen is on the line. Kristen, do you mind giving us a summary of item number 67, please?
Sure. So this is for mandatory irrigation controls. In the proposal, we have recommended that this move out of the Denver Green Code into the IPC. And what we're looking at is where irrigation controls for the site, where automatic irrigation controls are required, that those be smart irrigation controllers. So the smart meaning that they're capable of using evapotranspiration and weather data to control whether they turn on or off based on rain events. So these smart controllers must be WaterSense labeled. There's about a little under 1,000 WaterSense smart irrigation controllers in the database. They are a little bit more costly than a regular timer or scheduler, and can range from $100 to $200. I know that Denver Water does do some rebate programs around this, so this is definitely the direction in which irrigation controllers are moving. And since this is something that is done quite regularly, we wanted to move that into the regular code from being in the DGC. So I know that there's a lot of definitions that are here at the very front of this proposal. And so those would just go into the IPC as written. And if you scroll down a little bit, Kevin, when you see controls, that's where the language is listed. In addition, I know Shauna, you had mentioned that one of the, I think the first definition relates to ashtray, about the definition of automatic, and you were able to pull that. And so we need to make sure that that automatic definition is referenced here and not the ashtray standard. So I don't know if we got that in time. Maybe you want to move up, Kevin, and see if we put it in there. I didn't look.
We did, Kristen.
Okay. Great. So that should be in there, so you don't have to reference any other codes. And I think that's probably about it.
Okay, thanks, Kristen, for the summary. We will go to the general public now. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Lindsay, I see your hand up. I will unmute you. Please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, everyone. This is Lindsay Rogers. I'm a water policy analyst with Western Resource Advocates. We're a nonprofit environmental organization focused on protecting the West's land, air, and water. I am on our water team, and my work is focused on urban water conservation based in Edgewater. I just wanted to add that moving to smart controllers to a base code is something we've seen some of our neighbors take on over the years. So this is something that Castle Rock and Aurora have decided to do, and a number of other communities throughout the state of Colorado, as well as our other Western states. Thank you.
Thank you. Third and final call, anybody else from the general public to speak in support? Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public to speak in opposition? I don't see anybody else on the line, so we will skip all the formalities of that. We'll spare you the talk. So we'll go back to the committee for questions. Committee, anybody have any questions on this proposal? Mark, go ahead.
Yes, is this intended for both the IPC and the IRC plumbing sections? I see in the substantiation, homes is referred to several times.
I believe that is the recommendation, yes, since the Denver Green Code covers both residential and non-residential.
Okay, next question comes from Michael.
Yeah, so chapter 13, let me take a look, is non-potable water. Is the intent for this amendment to go for non-potable water?
Well, this is, it would be for both. So depending on if you're using non-potable or potable water, still conserving that resource is the intent. So I don't know if this shows what section it would be in. I don't know if we're finding a section for that, but I would think that it would be applicable to both non-potable and potable water sources for irrigation.
Well, it seems to me if chapter 13 is non-potable water. It does not apply to potable water. But maybe I'm seeing it not correctly.
I'm not sure, Shauna, do you know if we had identified a location in the IPC where this?
So that's why I was just going to ask Michael, where are you seeing any reference to chapter 13? Because this right now, the way I read it, it says code placement to be determined. So we don't even know where it's going yet. I think they're asking to approve the language, and then we'll have to figure out where it needs to go in both the IRC and the IPC, I'm guessing. But I'm not seeing a reference to chapter 13.
13 is mentioned in the next one, in item number C.
Oh, okay.
And they ought to be, they should be together. It's just that that's where it came from. And I would agree that with Michael, and we do need to talk about that. It's maybe the next step, but 13 would probably not be the right place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it
I'm
might
sorry.
be that you have to mix it up and put it in a couple different places. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That, I guess that's what my question was for Kristen is, do you want this idea and concept approved, and then we figure out where it needs to be placed? It might have to be broken up and put in a couple places or duplicated in a couple of places, or is there a place we need to land on?
Yeah, I would say conceptually, I would like to see this move forward, and then we can logistically figure out where it is placed with City and County of Denver.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, actually, one more hand went up. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, Kristen, could you expand on the evapotranspiration?
Evapotranspiration.
Yeah, I mean, is that something we need to calculate? I mean, because honestly, this is currently outside of the purview of the plumbing code. And so it's not something or the engineers at the city of Denver are trained, or it's in their wheelhouse to be able to verify these factors, like the ET. Like, is that something you calculate? And then how do the definitions of the plants correlate to the controller?
I think there's plant factors down here. So to address your first question, it's really about the controller itself and the capabilities of the controller. So they use sensors, right? Or they'll use weather data to figure out if it has rained, right? And so if it's on a pure timer, it's not going to do that, right? So the evapotranspiration sensor within the controller will be able to tell if it is, if there's moisture in the soil, and then it will adjust the irrigation schedule accordingly. So there should be no calculations that your department would have to look at. They would have to look at a product cut sheet to verify that it is indeed a smart controller. Did that answer your question, Chuck?
Yeah, and then how do the definitions of the plants play into the type of controller or the scope of the proposal?
I think if you go down, plants is listed and plant factors. And so do you see that on B? Plant factors in each hydrozone. So it's how you set up the controller. And so we wanted to make sure, since plant is italicized, that you have the definition of plant, and there's subsets of plants from the DGC. So I don't know if that's necessary, but that's how it's put in the DGC for definitions.
So how do
Okay,
you,
next question oh, Chuck, go ahead.
yeah, no, so you just mentioned the plant factors for each hydrozone. Like, I don't see plant factors as part of the definition.
So plant is plant.
So plant.
Anything that's italicized is a definition. And so we want to make sure that those definitions
Okay.
are available. Potentially, we could adjust that to be more specific to this particular proposal. It does seem to be
All right.
quite a bit.
Yeah. Next question comes from Mark.
And this is as much of a, following on the comment of Chuck's, is what would they be needing to review? This does seem to be more than just, did you buy the right controller? You're also saying that the, it needs to provide a certain amount of irrigation. The whole point about doing this is that you don't just overwater it. You don't just buy the right device and turn it to manual. You're supposed to come up with the correct irrigation adequacy, and you're not supposed to go over a certain amount irrigation excess. And it gets further interesting with the next proposal, which they go together well, I think. And I understand the purpose is to minimize irrigation water usage. But it is indeed another level of expertise and design that is being done, and Chuck, it's going to be similar to, say, outside air calculations. You ask us engineers to prove that the system has adequate outside air, and we put numbers on our drawings, and it's a little bit trust but verify, but you know how to verify. So that's kind of what I think this is going towards. Oops, wrong way.
Next question comes from Danny.
Kristen, you mentioned that the other surrounding jurisdictions have similar language.
Yeah, I think that was Lindsay.
Oh, Lindsay, sorry. Lindsay, do you know if this is coming from a plumbing code that required a plumbing permit in these other jurisdictions? It just seems to me it doesn't really fit in the plumbing code.
So technically, since Lindsay's not the proponent, she can't answer that. However, she does have an opportunity for rebuttal conversation after the question period. So maybe she can answer that in a rebuttal portion and answer your question, Danny.
Okay, yeah, so just to add to that a little bit more, a plumbing permit requires a licensed plumber. Would this fall under that same criteria that a licensed plumber would have to install a rain sensor or this type of system, or could it be some other license? I guess that's something that we would have to figure out.
Yeah, I would say typically, this would be installed by an irrigation contractor. And there's not a whole lot of design behind this. It's just the next level of, everything is kind of going to smart technology, right? And this is the next step for anything that has to do with irrigation. So I wouldn't say that a plumber would have to install this. It would be more of an irrigation contractor. Hopefully.
And I mean, irrigation isn't typically required for a certificate of occupation. So a CO wouldn't necessarily trigger this requirement, or a design engineer wouldn't necessarily have to put it on their drawings. It could be something of a deferred submittal, but it's something that we need to talk about, how it gets inspected, when it gets inspected. Is it a deferred submittal? Things of that nature.
Okay.
All right, next question comes from Jeff.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to clarify a little bit. Most other jurisdictions are using this within their landscape code. So I think that both Danny and Chuck's question of where does this go, how does this work, is that other jurisdictions are using this not in a plumbing code perspective, but it is part of landscape requirements, and it is attached to the CO within other jurisdictions. So I guess the question is, where does this go? I mean, I think Kristen had said we need to figure out where it goes within city code. And it may not be plumbing, it may be in a landscape code. And I guess, is that true? Can we specify it goes into a different code?
I don't think I can answer that.
Okay. I see we have Christy on the line. Christy L, maybe you can answer that or not, if it's a possibility to put this in a different code.
I'm happy to answer that. We don't have a landscape code to put this in, and we've been having landscape conversations over the course of the last year to try to establish the right location for different landscape regulations across different agency regulations. And we haven't been able to reach conclusion on that with the different agencies. So this is being proposed to go into the plumbing code so that we are not hamstrung by that lack of integration that hasn't been able to be accomplished prior to these hearings occurring, because we desperately need to make some advancements in this front. So the suggestion is to put it here. If someday in the future we are able to introduce a comprehensive landscape regulation or identify with other agencies a better home for it, we would love to move it there, obviously. In the meantime, if it can live here and this is viable for our mechanical plumbing team to live with it here, then this will enable us to make some advancements in the meantime. That cross-agency integration is formidable to accomplish.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Michael.
Yeah, kind of like similar to what Danny mentioned. I have some serious concerns with regards to putting this in the code. And the reason being is right now, it obviously doesn't need to be the landscape drawings or the irrigation drawings. I don't think they need to be permitted. So if we start putting this type of language in the code, which I don't think it belongs to on the plumbing code, then obviously those drawings will need to be stamped. And I'm not quite sure exactly if it's really well thought out of how is that going to get submitted for permit and inspected and all that stuff. So I think the intent is good and I don't object to the language, but I don't think putting it on the plumbing code is the right place to put it. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder, this is a question period, so just keep that in mind. But thanks for the input. Shauna, I see your hands up next.
Thank you. I'm just, for some clarification, if there's no other code to put it in and it needs to go in the plumbing code, I mean, that seems to be what people think, oh, this is irrigation and it'd be in a plumbing code. I've been searching where it should go, and there are opportunities that maybe we could ask. There are opportunities to take that chapter 13 and rename it from non-potable systems to, or non-potable water to non-potable water systems and irrigation, or to add a chapter 15 that is irrigation, and you start building on it every time, or to add it as maybe it's a special piping that goes in chapter 4 and it's in 427 irrigation controls or something. I don't know, but there we can find a place to do it if the committee wants it in there. So I just don't want that to be an issue. We'll figure that out. I don't know about the permitting and the who, you know, if you made it its own chapter, then you could talk about the permitting and who can install it and all of those kind of things. But none of that is done ahead of time. So that would be some additional work you'd have to do.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Frank. Frank, what's your question? Actually, Frank, are you able to turn on your camera by chance? See a black screen for you. Frank, I see I have you on mute. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted.
Did that work?
There you go.
Okay.
So you're unmuted.
This is Frank Gonzalez, Chief Plumbing Inspector, City of Denver. So if we end up doing a permit for this irrigation system, if it goes under the IRC, IPC, so at that point, then we're going to be triggering a plumbing inspection for it?
I wouldn't think so. But I don't know who else would inspect for it at this point.
I mean, because then why would it trigger the permit for it then? And that's what I'm trying to understand is, would my team have to inspect it?
Right.
Where currently we don't inspect irrigation systems.
Christy, do you know if any inspect irrigation systems currently?
I don't think anybody inspects irrigation systems currently. We have some green buildings ordinance regulations or provisions that tie to irrigation systems that haven't yet been integrated into the inspections process. So this is not without precedent as far as there being a need. But no, I don't believe that we inspect anything related to irrigation right now.
Okay. Something to consider. Next question comes from Mark.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that we're going to be dealing with what code it goes into. I'm going to try to ask some actual technical questions here. First of all, evapotranspiration rate in the body where it talks about controls, it says that shall be controlled by a qualifying automatic smart controller that uses ET and weather data. So two specific things that it must use. At the very end of that paragraph, it says smart controllers that use ET data, implying that maybe I had a choice that I didn't have to use ET based controller. So that kind of needs to be clarified, or at least let us know what that intent really was. And further, I also got to acknowledge that I'm far from a subject matter expert on this, so I don't know. When I was doing the research earlier, I did look up some of the references. It mentioned WaterSense is mentioned here. WaterSense says, when you go to their website, it talks about quote unquote weather-based is one type of controller, and a different type of controller is called soil moisture-based. So I've got 4 things in here. I've got ET, controller that uses ET and weather data, and I've got something called weather, or WaterSense has something called weather-based and soil and moisture-based. What does all that mean?
Okay. All right. So so I think there's a hopefully I can break this down for you. So typically you can use weather data from a weather station, right? And that is using evapotranspiration rates for the area and weather data to control the automatic controller. Or you can use a soil moisture sensor there locally instead of the weather-based data from the local station to control the same 2 things, evapotranspiration rates based upon climate, and then the weather data. So basically those 2 things, right? How fast things are going to evaporate and has it been raining, to control how things are turned off and on. So you can do it there locally with a sensor, or you can use the closest weather station for that information, meaning that they're similar, or you can do one or the other. Does that answer your question?
Well, sort of. So does that mean that it's possible to have a system that does not use ET data?
I'm not sure. I believe that the, and maybe Austin can address this, but I believe the water sense specification requires that they use both.
Well, okay. And then in that first sentence, again, it states a smart controller shall that uses ET and weather data. So is a water sense soil moisture based device not applicable?
No, it would use that as well. So it can it can be controlled with you know, with a sensor, or it can be controlled with a signal from a weather station, and you get both of those points of information.
And that, I guess that's maybe my lack of knowledge on these systems, but I guess I'm confused by that, the whole charging sentence here, that shall use weather-based. Oh, and then the very next is an or. So I'm not sure that.
So the two, let's see, the process for getting those two pieces of information can be different. They can be controlled by weather-based data or by a soil moisture sensor, but the information that they get is the same, which is the evapotranspiration rate and the weather data. So two different ways to get the same information. And it depends on what model and make of the smart controller that you get that will provide that. So you can sort by whether you get a signal from a weather station or you have a sensor.
So Mark, just maybe I can help shed a little light on that. This first weather data right here is either weather-based data or a soil moisture sensor. I think ultimately that's where it comes down to. Hopefully that helps.
Well, then,
I definitely see the confusion.
Yeah.
So yeah, weather data is either weather-based data or soil moisture sensor. Hopefully that helps. Next question comes from Austin.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and add that I think you covered it all, but yeah, basically weather data is going to be your rain, heat, cloud cover, UV reflectance, all that sort of stuff. All of that is taken into a fairly complex calculation that makes your evapotranspiration number. And then every single plant out there has a reference number that is how much that particular plant needs throughout the growing season. And every plant is slightly different, but they're basically kind of like plant classes that they all look the same. A lot of your deciduous trees here in Colorado operate at the same time when they leaf out and grow most vigorously and then lose their leaves. But the whole thing is just trying to figure out how much water the soil is using and losing to the atmosphere without being used by the plants, and then how much is being used by the plants. And that is what every weather-based, weather data and sensor-based, whether it be a soil moisture sensor or some other type of sensor, is after in the controls section here.
Thanks for that clarification, Austin. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll go back to the general public for rebuttals. Maybe Lindsay would answer the question we had on board. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in a rebuttal of support, please raise your hand. Oh, look at that, Lindsay. Lindsay, you will have 1 minute. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I think Jeff very well covered where we typically see these living in cities, which is landscaping standards within land use development codes. So this would be a little bit different, and I really appreciate all of the good discussion about where and how this could live within the IPC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Being that there are no other There are no other attendees from the general public. We'll skip the rest of that and we'll go back to the panel. Panel, this is your time to have further discussion. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, this is now your time. Or if you'd like to make a motion, this is your time to do so. The first hand up is Shauna.
Sorry, I just want to, I don't know where this is going. I have no idea, but I do want to acknowledge Mark's comment about the wording in that paragraph on controls. So the first "and" is just saying that the controller has to have the capability of doing this and this, weather and soil, right? So it's gonna do both. The second one, where it has an "or," is saying that it can shut the stuff off either by that weather part or the soil part, because it contains both. So it has to shut it off one way or by one of them or the other. But what the last sentence in there, so that says by SWAT, climatology-based controllers, AIDS testing protocol, smart controllers that use ET data shall provide. So it makes it sound like, oh, the ones that do that have to provide this information. And so you're saying that makes it sound like I don't necessarily have to do that. And so my suggestion is, if this passes, or you want to pass it, that a modification comes to just take out the words that use ET data, so that it just says smart controllers shall provide, right? And so then it doesn't sound like that's an extra option to have that ET, So those are just hopefully some clarification if you decide to go that route.
Thanks, Shauna. Any other discussions, or anybody want to make a motion on this? Matt, go ahead.
Well, I guess my question, or my thought process here is, it sounds like this isn't something that's going to be enforced by city inspectors. So it's not really in their wheelhouse, or it's not currently being inspected. So there's really not an enforcement arm to make sure that this is being done, right? So, and there's also the issue of licensed plumbers either doing this work or not doing this work, because it appears in the IPC. It sounds like it's not really the right fit for this code. And there, we're talking about a code that unfortunately doesn't have, or a provision that unfortunately doesn't have a code. I'm also thinking about, will irrigation designers know to look here? Because ordinarily they don't look at these codes at all. So, it's something where I don't know that a designer would see this as their responsibility, since they're not stamping something that qualifies under the IPC. So they may end up having to reach out, and I suppose they would have to go get someone to stamp their plans now that this requirement appears in the IPC. I'm trying to figure out how that would play out. So, someone who's accustomed to doing their irrigation design would then have to go seek out a stamp because this appears in the IPC. I'm thinking that may be ultimately the consequence of adding this to the IPC.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Next hand up is Mark.
Thank you. First of all, I'm going to take objection to go find a stamp, Matt. You know better than that. The issue is that the landscape designers need to employ, professional engineers. If a professional engineer is involved, you don't go stamp for hire, of course. Having said that, I think what we've got is two, big picture things that need to be dealt with. One, is this the right code? And I'm not thinking it is. And then, is it technically correct, and do the ands and ors work well together, in soil-based versus weather-based? I'm not qualified to comment on that. So I guess my comment is that I would probably defer a lot of the technical discussion, but I would probably be opposed to it being in the plumbing code. I really want to hear from the city and county of Denver. How would you review this? How would you permit this? I can figure out how to not stamp it, but I just wonder how you're going to enforce it.
Thank you. Next hand up is Chuck.
No, and I agree with you, Mark. I'll start with the technical aspect. I'm not qualified to speak to the technical substantiation to this proposal. It's not something that I'm familiar with. And so, but whether it belongs in the plumbing code or not, honestly, I don't believe it's quite the right fit. Lindsay brought up City of Aurora, so I went to their website and looked at their website, and I couldn't find a requirement for the smart controller, but I see that they have a $200 rebate if you install a smart controller, and they provide it. And then there's irrigation. They have a whole fee structure. They have a whole irrigation submittal requirements. They have the City of Aurora has a whole team that reviews irrigation plans, inspects irrigation systems, permits irrigation systems. There's a whole structure that goes behind their regulations. And this would be almost going backwards, initiating a regulation, and then we would try to figure out how to enforce it. And I don't think that's the right path. So I personally, I don't think this belongs in the plumbing code at this time.
Okay, next hand up is Michael.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Matt, Mark, and Chuck. I don't think it belongs to the IPC. And I don't know of any irrigation consultants that they have a stamp. So it seems to me it needs to be somewhere else. Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up, so I'll ask the question. If since I've heard some commentary, if you don't think it belongs in the plumbing code, do you agree with this proposal as long as it's in the right section of the code? I'll just throw that out there, because right now it's yet to be determined on where it's going. So don't think it has to go in the plumbing code. Michael, go ahead.
Well, if it doesn't go on the plumbing code, are we allowed to vote on it? I'm not quite sure what the logic behind it is. Like, I will put it on the energy code. No, I'm kidding. Anyway.
Yes, because the proposal is written that the placement is to be determined, we can vote on the context of the proposal, and then it would be up to the city to figure out where it needs to be placed, the appropriate place to place this proposal. Chuck, you're up next.
Yeah, and I from what I agree with, like Mark, I don't think well, I'm speaking for myself, but I don't think the IPC committee has the expertise in landscape design to determine whether or not the technical viability of this proposal.
Okay, next up is Mark.
And just quickly, you asked, I am definitely in support of this. I would like to see this enforced by the same people who would enforce making sprinklers not spray on sidewalks, right? But who is that?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so I'll see if there's a motion out there. It looks like the discussion's over. You can continue discussion, but I think we're at a point where someone can make a motion. Austin, go ahead.
I'd make a motion to vote on it as written, with intention to move it somewhere outside of plumbing code.
Okay, I'm just making a note. Okay, so there is a motion to approve as written with the intent of this being outside of the plumbing code. Shauna, your hand's up.
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're going with the idea of doing that, Kevin, but I just want to, before you vote on that, to really think about if the plumbing committee approves this and says it goes somewhere else, and so they say, okay, it goes in the energy code, because the energy code deals with sites, systems, and the building. So maybe it goes in the energy code. Okay, well, then the energy code committee just has to accept it because the plumbing committee approved it. Like, if it's really going to go outside of this code, then wherever it's going, that committee should get to hear it. Like, I just want to make sure that if we approve this, the plumbing code committee approves it with that motion that was just made. Does that mean the energy code committee, or whoever it goes, has to automatically accept it? Or do they get to hear it again? If they get to hear it again, there's no point in these guys approving it. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great technical question on that. I don't know. Maybe I can defer to the city here with Christy on the line. I know, Christy, you probably weren't planning to be on the line to answer a bunch of questions, but take advantage of that if maybe you can help shed some light.
I would typically expect from a process standpoint that another committee would have to look at it before it could be just simply moved into a different regulation. And I think what I'm also going to add that I'm struggling with is that I have no idea what other committee that would be at this point.
Sure. Okay, so I'm kind of at a standstill as well. Let's, I guess.
Well, you don't yet have a
Go
second
ahead.
on that. You don't have a second on that motion. So I don't,
Right.
unless there's a second, you don't have to deal with it.
Chuck, I saw your hand up and go down. I don't know if you had anything else to add.
No, I mean, honestly, because if we move it to another committee, it has to go to another code. And looking at the other codes that are being heard now, fire code, building code, fuel gas code, mechanical code, plumbing code, like those are the energy code, maybe. Those are the codes the CPD regulates, or the building department. Those are the codes that are being heard currently as part of this code adoption process. And I think this belongs in a landscape standard or in the zoning code, and without identifying the resources who are going to review for this, inspect for this, none of that's been vetted prior to this. And so without identifying the resources of how this would be enforced and how this would be regulated and inspected and what the submittal requirements were, being all that, I personally am going to vote to disapprove this proposal.
Okay, so I believe you were the one that made the motion. So do you want to withdraw your motion then? Oh, sorry, that was Austin. Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, so is there a second to approve with the intent of it being outside of the plumbing code? Okay, I don't see a second. So that motion falls. So I believe at this time there is a opportunity for another motion. I don't think it fails completely because there wasn't a second. I just think the motion does not move forward. Matt, go ahead.
Motion to disapprove the proposal.
Okay, there's a motion to disapprove.
Second.
Michael?
I'll second, but check happened first.
Okay, so there's 2 seconds and there's a second and a third. And it's okay that you all feel that there is a place and time for this to belong in the code. It just maybe not right now. It needs to be vetted a little bit further. And that's completely fine. That's some of the feedback that part of these code hearings are about, is to know that there are people on board for it. It's just, it needs to be vetted a little bit more. So it's okay to do that. Chuck, I see your hand still up. I don't know if that was a leftover.
Leftover.
Okay. Any further discussion?
And
Austin, your hand's up first.
Yeah, I agree with what others have said. It seems like this absolutely needs to go towards a landscape designs or landscape code, but we're in the interim until we have a landscape code, just basically saying that we don't have any jurisdiction over the landscape that we have out in city and county of Denver. So, I mean, where does all of the rules and regulations of supporting street trees and things like that go? That might be another place that this would need to go as well.
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
So the Office of the City Forester has right-of-way regulations that pertain to trees. They are in the process of updating those. They have not been updated since 1971. So they're pretty antiquated, and that would be where something like this might want to live. Austin, I think Denver Water is involved in that process, and you probably are aware of that. The urban tree roundtable sessions that happened in February and March are tied to that effort.
All right, next point of discussion comes from Mark.
And that is just that yes, want to support this, don't want this vote to show that it ought not be done. But any of the codes I would suggest is the wrong place. This, boy, it sure seems like it's Denver Water's purview. They definitely have, irrigation landscape plan requirements, but I think that kicks in for, there it is, just an acre and above. If anything needs to be tweaked, that's perhaps where it needs to be tweaked, but they'd be the ones. You can't hook into our system unless you follow these requirements.
Thank you. Next hand is Michael.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Mark too. So,
Sorry.
I mean, when we submit for a water meter, I mean, there's some plans that for Denver Water, maybe the irrigation can go to the Denver Water department. Maybe that's the right place. But I mean, it's not up to me to determine that, but it definitely doesn't. We have no expertise on this issue, especially under IPC.
Okay, next up is Austin.
Yep, I appreciate that, Mark. Unfortunately, since Denver Water is a separate entity from the city and county of Denver, and we serve more than just the city and county of Denver, we are not the authority and land use for the entire metro area. So we do not have that authority like you're suggesting that we do.
Okay. Last call for discussion. Okay, seeing none, there is a motion to disapprove and a second. I will call a vote. All those in favor of disapproving, please raise your hand. I see 7. Go ahead and lower your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 1. Okay, so this is disapproved. We'll move on to the next item of business. Next item of business is P34.1, and I don't have a Word document of that, but I will pull up the PDF. And this is Lindsay. Lindsay, would you please give us a summary of your proposal?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So while we're getting that raised up here, this proposal deals with creating a landscape water budget, which similarly to the last proposal, it comes directly from the Denver Green Code, which has since been updated just as of a couple of weeks ago to be a bit more stringent than the base code that we're recommending here. I do want to acknowledge that this water budget proposal is is similar to the last standard and the good discussion that we just had around what fits into and what does not fit into the IPC. Right now, this is slated into Chapter 13, which would likely need to be updated because it certainly is referring to potable and non-potable water sources. But I do, I want to run through the standard. Even obviously there'll be some discussion about how this gets enforced or what code is appropriate for it. I do think that it's helpful, regardless of whether it belongs in the IPC, to hear some of your initial thoughts on this concept. So the proposal is designed to reduce landscape water demand in new development and really to future-proof Denver's landscaping, because we all know that there's going to come a time in the not so distant future when Denver faces more prolonged droughts. A compact call really has to curtail water use, and that starts with outdoor water use, as we know. With this standard, a resident or property owner has a lot of flexibility on what they install, as long as the average potable water demand for the site after that initial establishment period is 10 gallons per square foot or less. So someone can meet this water budget with a mix of high, medium, and low hydrozone plants. And then you have the opportunity to use alternative sources like gray water and rainwater to increase that square footage, that water budget. Again, this was in the first version of the Denver Green Code, and it's been a requirement of the Denver Water System Development Rebate Pilot for several years, with some success there. And under that pilot, it was shown that all development types could meet that 10 gallons per square foot benchmark with relative ease. So that's why we're recommending it for base code. And there are a number of examples of folks who are doing this type of approach across the West. Locally, the city of Aspen has adopted a 7.5 gallon per square foot water budget for their base code. And this is also a recommendation in the South Metro Water Supply Authority's model landscape ordinance. And finally, I'll note that just to give folks an example of what this actually looks like on the ground, I did a few back of the envelope calculations that take into account evapotranspiration, effective precipitation, plant factors. And you would basically get to 10 gallons per square foot if you installed 35% high water use landscaping like Kentucky bluegrass, 20% medium landscaping, some of our trees and shrubs, and then 45% low water landscaping, native adaptive perennial plant species. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like. And I'll go ahead and pause there.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Being that you're the only one on from the general public at this point, you also have the opportunity to speak in support of this, different from what you just gave us a summary on. If you'd like to do that, please raise your hand. Okay, you probably already said what you wanted to say, so I'll go over to the back to the committee here. Committee, this is your time to ask questions. Any questions about this proposal? I'll ask one more time if there's any questions. This is now your opportunity that Lindsay will have the ability to respond to your questions. You still have the ability to ask questions in the next section, but she won't be necessarily available to answer that. So if you have any questions, now's your time to ask those. Okay, seeing none, I'll go to the discussion portion. Any discussion or anybody want to make a motion? I almost think I lost my internet there, but I see people moving. So Mark, your hand's up. Go ahead. Mark, you are on mute. Mark, you are on mute. If you want to retry that again.
I said I will. I'll do it because somebody's got to do it. I move that we disapprove this for all the reasons we just took half an hour to discuss.
There's a motion to disapprove. Matt,
I second.
there's a second. Okay, any further discussion? Let's see, Austin, go ahead.
Just curious, from a process standpoint, does approving any of these at least help get the discussion rolling on the city side to show a need for more landscape ordinance language outside of what we're discussing right here?
Sure. Christy, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. We are trying to figure out how we gain that momentum. I think that there's a general sensibility that it's needed. Would approving these help with that? It might pile on. It certainly couldn't hurt with that. I'm not expecting that it would be the thing that pushes that and gets the boulder rolling.
Thank you. Any other discussion before I call a vote? Shauna, go ahead. Shauna, you are on mute if you want to unmute.
Because these are recorded and because these minutes are kept, I think that if you want to, it's important that you say what you agree with and what you don't agree with, so that even if they don't pass, that the city knows that you're for it. You just don't know where it needs to go, or what they need to work on to bring it back, or whatever. Those kind of things will help them in the future, no matter what. And it is a part of permanent public record.
Very good point, Shauna. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, to Shauna's point, I would want to say that there seems to be a real hole between what Denver Water is providing and what the city of Denver is doing. And I think that the ideal state is that the city does need to have some responsibility on, as a land use planning authority, to say what is the plant material, how will new development and what will the city's landscape look like and function like, and that, to Lindsay's point of, drought is going to impact the West a lot more as the climate warms. How is the city going to react to that and make a livable place for citizens of Denver? And if we lack the ability to have a code now, I think this needs to be at least brought up, that there does need to be some discussion of where does it go? How does this move into a part of planning that the city does? And I'll let others talk.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the section 1301.4. Again, it's for non-potable, and it does have a section that requires a permit. It says permits shall be required for the construction, installation, alteration, and repair of non-potable water systems. But again, it's for non-potable systems. So I just wanted to mention that. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last call for discussion before I call for a vote. Okay, seeing none, there is a motion to disapprove and a second. All those in favor of disapproval, please raise your hand. I count 7. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. C1, go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 0. Okay, this is disapproved. So we are about the halfway point. What I'll do is go ahead and take let's do an 8-minute break here, and we will return back. I'll put 8 minutes on the timer on the clock. Feel free to turn off your videos, do what you need to do, and we'll see you back in about 8 minutes. Okay, if you can hear my voice, let's start making our way back. All right, welcome back, everyone. Where did it go? Anyway, it ran out, so no big deal. The next item up on the agenda is 34.2. And Lindsay, I believe that one's also yours, so I'll go ahead and allow you to talk. If you can give us a summary, and I will pull that up.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. So this next standard is a recommendation to include required sub-metering for irrigated landscapes. Again, I'll note maybe some of the same discussion needs to happen around where this fits in the code and who is sort of enforcing this. The recommendation is the justification for this proposal is to ensure we have some long-term management of efficient irrigation use. So by having a meter or sub-meter dedicated to irrigation use, a customer can better understand if they're being efficient with that water. And we know that monitoring smaller sites like this is supported by Denver's Office of Transportation and Infrastructure, especially when it comes to some of their stormwater management goals. This amendment was taken from Denver's Green Code, which has now been updated to have a smaller threshold of 10,000 square feet for those sub-metering requirements. So this is a little bit larger. It would cover fewer properties. And a number of communities in Colorado already have codes in place that have taken a similar step and that actually go a bit further to say that any non-residential landscape area or any landscape area greater than 5,000 square feet have this dedicated sub-meter. So that's the case for Castle Rock, the city of Aspen. Again, it's in that South Metro Water Authority model landscape ordinance. And I will go ahead and pause there.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go to the general public. Lindsay, you are the general public at this point. Do you want to speak in support of this in addition to what you just gave in your summary? Let's see her hand up. So we will go to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Anybody from the committee have questions? Second call for questions from the committee. Chuck, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. In the proposal, it suggests that the controller be able to use inputs from the flow meter and sensor to control the irrigation. The flows are abnormal. Is that if something breaks in the system or there's something unexpected? And then it also says that the equipment shall be able to remotely measure and transmit water use data. Where is that data intended to be sent?
Lindsay, feel free to unmute to answer those questions.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting to the part of the proposal where you were addressing this question. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the first one was, what does it mean by the flows are abnormal? Is that like something breaks in the system, like a head breaks, or what's the intent behind that? And then the second one was, where do we, who's collecting the data? Where are we transmitting the data? Just a little more clarification on that.
I see. Okay, thank you. I may pitch this over to Austin or others on the call who have more knowledge of the technical aspects of these flow meters.
Yeah, I
Okay,
can
Austin, go
jump
ahead.
in. The flow meter sensor to control irrigation flows are abnormal. That is absolutely if a line breaks or a head is constantly running. So this is your classic see a geyser in the park that runs for 45 minutes until they shut off the entire zone. Depending on how intricate the system is, some do a single master shutoff right at the flow sensor, and then others will do that for each zone. But just as a starting point to be able to shut it off if anything is wrong. Some of them do it automatically, others will send an alert out to the manager or the owner and go from there. And then the other portion, most of them either send the data back directly to the irrigation timer, and whatever interface you have with that will display how many gallons were used per zone, or if you run it for an extra amount of time, you can kind of basically roll back up to see if you're managing the site based on what the weather would indicate, or if you're using more water or less water compared to weather, things like that. So it's just it ties into management tools.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Mark. Mark, you are on mute.
And thank you. Again, just a couple technical questions, not the expert on irrigation here. What is meant by a flow sensor, and how does that differ from a flow meter? You know, this person who is familiar with everything else in the plumbing code a flow sensor is just a little paddle switch that says, yep, you got flow. So what's meant by a flow sensor? That's not a flow meter.
Lindsay, go ahead and unmute if you want.
Yeah, my sense of this is that we're using these terms interchangeably, and I'm not sure honestly why that decision was made in the Denver Green Code where this was pulled from to use those two terms. My understanding is that they are being used interchangeably here.
All right, well, that's good to know your intent. Maybe we can work on that. Is it your intent that the amount of gallons is measured, right? I mean, you're wanting to actually measure a volume of water here, right?
Exactly, either through a dedicated irrigation meter or a flow sensor that has that capability.
We can work on that. And then the other comment here is kind of following on with Chuck. I could see a code minimum simply say that shall be able to use the inputs without dictating how they're used by a building manager. I would find that to be difficult to do, because that gets into set points and timing, and back some of the things you're talking about before, your water budget and how do you know what's right. I don't know we can put that into a code. What we can put into a code is that they at least buy the hardware that gets a building manager the data they need. We do that all the time in even in the energy code with submetering. We say you shall have submetering, but you can just put a piece of black tape over the readout if you want to. So anyway, I would I'll leave comments to later, but that was my questions. Would you find it, what's your opinion of if we just had the ability to measure rather than trying to come up with enforcement language?
I'm comfortable with having the ability to measure in this standard as opposed to enforcement language.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the committee? Third and final call. Questions? Seeing none, I'll put Lindsay back on mute. And committee, this is now your time for discussion or to make a motion. Anybody want to have further discussion? Mark, go ahead.
I'm going to ask the city guys, what are you comfortable with enforcing this? Would the plumbing reviewers recognize when there's greater than 25,000 square feet? That would influence us. Otherwise, I was given, I think this isn't all that horrible in the plumbing code. It doesn't belong in 13 because that has to do with, unless we change the heading like Shauna had mentioned earlier, it really, you're only reading that if you're doing a gray water system. That's the only reason you're reading chapter 13. So we could find another place, 604 perhaps. But the real question to the committee members from the city is, what do you think?
So to me, this is a lot more palatable. I don't think it even needs a review necessarily. Irrigation still needs a backflow preventer, which is a quick permit, a quick permit, meaning that it's a permit that doesn't need to be reviewed, stamped, or anything to that nature. It could be the irrigation contractor just putting in a meter in conjunction with the backflow preventer. So this is a lot easier to swallow and navigate within the city. That's my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, I concur. My only question would be the last sentence. If a flow meter is used, the controller shall be capable to use inputs to the flow meter sensor to control irrigation. The flows are abnormal. I don't know the ready availability of sprinkler controls that integrate with flow sensors to shut off sensor. Maybe, like Danny said, this is something that we don't specifically review for. It just lives in our code and essentially goes unregulated because it's not part of our permitting purview.
Yeah, I don't know anything about process side for the city. I think the language in that last one, shall be able to use inputs from flow meters, basically future proofing and making sure that the meter is capable of talking with your sprinkler system. Whether you use it or not is another question. And if it's unenforced, I don't know if it's necessarily problematic, but it gives somebody the power to monitor it at a much higher level in the future if they want to.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Anybody want to make a motion? Mark, go ahead.
I make a motion to approve as modified, and I'll give it a shot here at language on the goal. I say strike everything from master valve to just past shall be, so that it reads irrigated landscape area greater than 25,000 square feet shall have a master valve. There needs to be an and in there, and shall be submetered with equipment that can remotely measure and transmit water data, period. I'm debating whether this motion goes on and strikes the next sentence because of the concerns about how enforceable it is. I will leave it there for now. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now, although recognizing that I am not aware whether or not that kind of meter is a relatively everyday thing in 2022.
Okay, Mark. So you made a motion to
Yeah, you've captured it correctly the way I've left it.
Okay. Okay, great. Michael, your hand's up next.
I might take it I will ask obviously the committee's opinion too, but take it a little bit farther and just have a meter. So let me just irrigate landscape area greater than 20. So I'll have a master valve and shall be sub-metered. And period. And then remove the rest of it. If the intent is just to meter, I'm not quite sure exactly who is, yeah, that's my personal opinion. I'll mute.
Sorry, Michael. Are you saying that the text that's highlighted currently on the screen you would consider or would like to see potentially removed? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. All right, Austin, your hand's up.
Are we in discussion right now, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I would leave the sentence that is currently highlight. I think the initial intent is not just to submeter, but also to help manage water usage on site. If you put a manual submeter on site, it's almost guaranteed to not be looked at after it's initially installed. So I think the language that can remotely measure and transmit the water data is crucial to the intent of the original proposal.
Okay, thank you. Mark, I'm going to lower your hand.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so there is a motion to amend this proposal, and that amendment is in red on the screen. Is there a second? Austin, go ahead.
I will second as currently written.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote just on that amendment portion. So all those in favor of amending this to add the word and strike the words with flow sensors and or landscape areas. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, hands are still moving. I see 6. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I see 3. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining. Okay, so that amendment passes. So that opens up an opportunity for more discussion and for another motion. Does anybody want to make a motion to, okay, I saw Michael, your hand go up.
As far as the discussion, I don't know exactly what that means. If flows are abnormal, I guess who is making that decision? And that seems to me is not really code language or.
Okay. Maybe our subject matter expert, Shauna, can weigh in on that.
That's a great question, because that would definitely come up at the national level. In fact, I circled it on mine because when you say it's abnormal, then it raises a red flag at code hearings to say, well, abnormal to who? What's abnormal? So I did circle that. What is abnormal? But I know that it was discussed what it would be abnormal. And so I don't know if there's a better way to clarify that. My question though, my concern is about you have this modification that removes the word flow sensors, but in the last sentence, it has to use the input from the flow sensor. And so I just want to make sure that it still makes sense and that it's still okay the way that it reads, having struck that out in one part and not in the other. As long as it still works, I am okay. I just want to talk about both the flows are abnormal and whether or not striking the word flow sensors affects this last sentence that's talking about inputs from those flow sensors.
Okay, thank you. Next hand is Chuck.
Yeah, I struggle with the flows are normal as well, understanding exactly what that is. And then also, what is the controller supposed to do when those flows are abnormal? It says is able to use those inputs from the flow meter to control irrigation. So is that reducing, shut off? Does it shut it off and require maintenance? Does that just reduce the volume of water that's going through to the irrigation? So I don't know. I struggle with the entire last sentence as part of this proposal. I think just having it metered might be a good step forward.
Okay, next hand up is Mark.
Hi, yeah, a couple things I can sort of, and this, you were getting into some of the reasons I decided not to include that last sentence. However, I concur with Shauna that we ought to strike /censor just to make the language be consistent with what we did with the motion I did make. Okay, and then as far as what to do if it's abnormal, that's the issue, or that's what we're accepting, I guess. If we leave it as is, you just have the ability to do something with it. If there's an alarm that says, alarm after so many GPM, there's nothing that prevents an operator from saying, I only want that alarm to trigger it at a bajillion gallons, right? It's going to be hard to put that in language, but it's not without precedent within the code. It's sort of similar to the fault diagnostics and determination, whatever that is, within the energy code for economizers, which basically says, give me an alarm if it's not working right. So it's possible. I think it's a feature, not a bug, that it doesn't try to say too much about it. But you sense I'm a little conflicted with that last sentence as well, but it's not the worst thing that's ever shown up in the code.
Okay, so Mark, you want to make a motion to strike that /censor?
Yes, so moved as the highlighted text to be struck.
Anybody want to make a second on that? Chuck. Okay. Chuck seconds. I will call a vote real quick on that item while you guys ponder over the rest of your decision on the proposal. All those, Mark, I'm going to lower your hand real quick so we have a zero count. All those in favor of striking the second or the word /censor in the last sentence of this, please raise your hand. I see a few hands still going. I see 9. Go ahead and lower your hands. I'm going to lower yours because it's still up. There you go. And all those opposed, please raise your hand. 0. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 0. Okay, just a quick point of order. Jeff, I see you are on the line. Are you able to raise your hand or not? I don't believe you've been voting the past few times, so I want to make sure you have the ability. I see you don't have your camera on. I don't
Jeff
see the
is a
ability.
non-voting member.
Okay, great. Thank you. I wanted to make sure we're good. So Erica, are we still at 10 then?
We're at 9.
Okay, we're at 9. Great. That lines up with my numbers then. Thank you. Okay, so that passes by striking that last slash censor. Is there any other discussion or motions? Matt, go ahead.
So I think I'm struggling between the original intent of this and what we seem to be gravitating towards. So the intent of this is to measure to identify pattern usage and reduce that over time. But we're also concerned with a line breakage, which would be an immediate increase in flow, perhaps, that would be identified and shut off. That last sentence seems to, I suppose, get at the latter of those, where if there was a rupture and a high flow rate, that I suppose the intent is the master valve would close in response to a failure in the pipe system. Which to me would be something that would be appropriate. So, if we put in a meter that saw an immediate spike or something out of range, that would be cause to shut off that irrigation supply. I guess I'm thinking out loud a little bit about also, the last sentence of that. I'm trying to figure out which, are we trying to write in the intent to simply shut it off in the event of a failure, or do we not necessarily care? What's the intent there? I think that's as far as I got, really, was saying, if the intent is that we want it to shut off in the event of a failure, then the last sentence should be changed to say so, and nothing else. I'm curious what others think on that.
Okay, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Matt. It seems to me the intent is to measure and make some decisions, and then if something breaks, to stop the flow, but it is not, and maybe that will justify the word abnormal, but I'm not quite sure exactly. I guess I'm not quite sure exactly the intent. Yeah, so I agree with Matt.
Okay, thank you. Next hand is Austin.
Yeah, again, I think the overall intent of this is just better water management, and to reduce water use where easily possible. And the obvious one is line break, system failure, that sort of thing, automatic shut off of the master valve. But there is also kind of the be able to use inputs could also be taken as setting a monthly maximum irrigation you wanted to see on that. So perhaps Parks does that from a budgetary constraint side. They don't really care about the overall volume, but they don't want to exceed $20,000 on a park. So they set their water budget based off of that. They get a reminder when they get above that. That would kind of be the water management piece under the current language. So that I guess that's another way to think about it.
Any other discussion, or anybody want to make a motion? Shauna.
It sounds to me like we're having some issue with the last sentence, and what is it trying to do? It's trying to control the irrigation, but is it trying to shut it off? Is it trying to slow it down? What is it trying to do? And what is abnormal? It sounds to me like abnormal is a spike. So why don't we call it a spike, right? So I'm just wondering if there is the possibility to amend that last sentence that says that the controller shall be able to use the inputs from the flow meter to shut down irrigation if abnormal spikes in flow occur. If that's really what you're trying to do. If it's you could use the word abnormal, but you got to say, is it abnormal? Like, is it capable to spike, or if it's abnormal to be lower than normal? Not usually. It's usually there's a break and there's a spike. So can we say abnormal spike in flow? So that's just trying to listening to what everybody's saying and trying to reword that last sentence. Again,
Thanks, Shauna.
shut down irrigation if abnormal spikes in flow occur.
Okay, Matt, you're up next.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, we're talking about large systems here, 25,000 square feet. So anything smaller than that, you know, we're not talking about. You know, even detecting something like what is or is not a spike in a system that's that large. If you had, say, a little 1/4-inch line or something somewhere out in the system, if it did rupture, a master flow meter that's measuring the entire consumption for 25,000 square feet of irrigated area may not detect that there was actually a rupture in the first place. So we may not be, it may not be achieving the goal it was intended to. But if there was an irrigation system design that had the ability to detect that and report that, yes, we do have a rupture in the system, yes, we need to shut that master valve, as far as the plumbing code is concerned, the pieces that we're talking about adding are a valve and a submeter, full stop, right? So it's there, it can be used, it cannot be used. That's all we're really asking for, is to have the pieces and parts in place. I mean, with that understanding, I would move to strike the last sentence of the proposal.
Did I capture that correctly, Matt?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Is there a second? There's a motion to strike the last sentence. Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, Danny seconds that. Any further discussion on that? Austin, go ahead.
With this back to having that completely struck out of there, now we have a submeter that does nothing. It's installed, it adds cost, but it does not help you manage your site.
So why wouldn't it manage your site if you are alerted to an abnormality? Why wouldn't a maintenance fix that?
We just say can remotely measure and transmit water use data. We don't say that it's alerting anything at this point.
Okay, next hand up for discussion is Michael.
I'm really struggling with this, because how will you make intelligent decision that something is abnormal? I mean, so sometimes when we do a building, we put a water sensor to measure if something breaks, and then we'll shut off or something like that. But I think some of the language is written, but there's really not the technology or the engineering behind it to really make an intelligent decision on that. So how will somebody really know if something is abnormal? I guess you can maybe measure. I'm not even sure exactly what will trigger that or who will calibrate that. So that's my personal opinion.
Okay, next hand up is Matt.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this goes along with the fact that the system is so large. Something that's that big is going to be provided with a downstream control system by zone. We were talking earlier about the nuances of irrigation design. Again, I'm not a subject matter expert on irrigation, but a system like that would expect to have several different zones downstream and an associated control system that's designed under under many of the proposals we just discussed a few minutes ago. So, as far as the plumbing code is concerned, my thought is that the parts are there, but they're intended to be there so that an irrigation system could communicate with them to execute the functions that I think we're after here. It's not, I think I struggle with saying that the plumbing code is just going to take care of any and all ruptures just by having one sensor and one valve on a system like that. I just don't think that's feasible, right? And to Michael's point, it's difficult to understand what is or is not abnormal. But in those systems, I would expect that there would be a control system downstream of that would have a better bead on whether there is or is not an abnormal flow. And if it detected that there needed to be a shutdown, it would have a connection to a master valve in order to do so. The purpose of the submeter then is really just to get that year over year, month over month information that could be used by a third party system or someone to detect if there's been more water usage than anticipated. So, again, there's a boundary here where the IPC and the irrigation design are in separate realms, so to speak. So that's why I'd be in support of what's shown here.
Okay, next hand is Chuck.
Yeah, and I'll agree with Matt, and I'll just expand. Like, there's other areas of the code that require submeters. Like, we require submeters on apartments. The energy code is moving towards submetering, and it's more for the third party to be able to track energy usage, water usage, and see if there's abnormalities, and be able to identify, if there's more energy or more water used. But none of those code requirements require like any sort of integration with automation to reduce the water usage or the energy usage within a building. It's just the ability to be able to track and to document it and be able to make decisions based on the data received.
Okay, thank you. So there's a motion to strike the last sentence and a second. We just finished our discussion. I will call a vote on that. All those in favor of striking the last sentence, please raise your hand. I see 7. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I see 1. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I see 0. Okay, so the last sentence. Oh, sorry, there's one. One popped up at the end there. Unless Frank, you have a question. Frank, do you have something to add? Frank, you're on mute if you are. Frank, your hand's up and you're on mute. I don't know if you can control either one of those, but we will move forward.
Sorry, phone is about to die. So apologize for that.
Oh, no worries. It happens. All right, so there's an opportunity for another motion. Yeah, go ahead.
I move to pass the proposal as amended.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, that was Mark. Mark
Yes.
seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote. There's a motion to approve as amended. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see 8. Go ahead and lower your hands. Sorry, there was a 9 right there that popped up at the end. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. So that would make 9 votes. Okay, so this now passes as amended. Thank you for that. Let me go back to our agenda. That was 34.2. We are now at 34.4. And Lindsay, this one is also yours, so I'll unmute you and give us a summary on it.
Thanks, everyone. All right, the good news on this standard is we are pretty confident about where it fits. So that's section 604.4 max flow rate. So this standard is dealing with water efficient plumbing fixtures. Denver Water's water efficiency plan has a goal to really be moving all customers along this spectrum towards being much more efficient with their water use, both with irrigation that we've been talking about, but also with indoor water use. We know that in Denver, a lot of water is used indoors. And more water efficient products are becoming available in the marketplace. So we feel that it's time to slowly ratchet down water use of these particular fixtures. Through the Denver Water System Development Credit Pilot Program that I mentioned, and 2 years of having these specific standards that we're recommending in the Denver Green Code, we know that all of these fixtures can easily be found in the marketplace, and the availability and the relative price parity should make these, we feel that means that they should become a part of our standard IPC. So we're specifically making recommendations today for the standards that are highlighted here. So shower heads, we would move to 1.8 gallons per minute at 80 PSI. EPA water sense maximum, just to give you a sense of this, and as we all know, EPA water sense maximums are what is legally available to be sold in Colorado per state statute. So the maximum for shower heads is 2.0 gallons per minute. So currently, actually, current code here isn't in line with what's illegally allowed to be sold in Colorado, at least to my knowledge. This standard was at 1.8 in the Denver Green Code and has been updated to 1.5 now, as of a couple weeks ago. Bathroom sink faucets. So we're separating out here what was one category, which was sink faucets, and we know that there is typically a need to have a bit higher pressure on a kitchen sink than a bathroom sink. So what we've done is created two separate fixtures here. So for bathroom sink faucets, we would be looking to move to 1.5 gallons per minute at 60 PSI. This is the EPA water sense standard, so it's in line with what's legally available for purchase in Colorado. We've then added this additional fixture here around kitchen sinks, which we'd be recommending 1.8 gallons per minute with this temporary override to 2.2 gallons per minute allowed if you're needing that extra pressure for, say, like a heavy pot and dirty pot. So water sense doesn't actually apply to kitchen sinks, so they don't have a standard, but the maximum flow follows, they follow federal standards, which are 2.2 gallons per minute. So again, we're using that override capability here, which matches federal standard. And then urinals, we're looking at 0.125 gallon flush volume, which is the standard in the Green Code. The EPA water sense standard is 0.5 gallons per gallon flush volume. Lots of fixture availability for urinals at that flush volume. And then finally, the water closet tank type toilets would be updated to 1.1 gallons per flush. EPA water sense is 1.28. We know that there's a lot of market availability at 1.1 gallon per flush, even down to 0.8 gallons per flush, which was piloted in that system development credit pilot through Denver Water. There's a number of different brands that go all the way down to those hyper water efficiencies, but 1.1 is available through all of the major toilet brands. So lots of different numbers there, but I'll go ahead and pause there and see if folks have questions.
Thanks, Lindsay. I have to ask if you want to speak in support of this, even though you were the proponent.
No, thank you. I'm in support of this recommendation.
Sure. All right, that makes it simple. We'll go to the committee now for a question. Chuck, I see your hand up first.
Yes, thank you. You've created a new category with bathroom sink faucet, and I was curious, how is that public bathrooms, residential bathrooms, and how does that how do you differentiate that plumbing fixture versus a private lavatory, public lavatory in the top of the fixture chart?
Thanks, Chuck. That was a question that I thought would come up and that I'm going to need some support on, because I was having a hard time discerning those definitions myself, actually, in the IPC. So I'm not sure if maybe our subject matter expert can jump in there, but I'm going to need some clarification on that as well in order to answer that question.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Sean.
I'm not, I was researching because this proposal, there was something about it at the national hearings. I didn't hear Chuck's question, and I'm so sorry because I was researching. The national 2024 had lowered that shower head to 2.0. And so, but there was a modification, and I'm trying so hard to find it. And so I didn't hear the question. So I just need you to repeat it.
Sure. Chuck, go ahead.
So the fixture chart here has, they've added a bathroom sink faucet category. And I was asking, how do we differentiate that plumbing fixture from a private lavatory, public lavatory? What's the difference in plumbing fixture there? What's the intent?
Yeah, I mean, you would have to call that out in your intent, right? Do you want this to be a public lab? Do you want this to be a private lab? Is this like those bathrooms that are in a private office, or is this a public lab that's, that is open to everybody? That intent would have to be identified. To just say bathroom sink, it'd apply to everything.
I think that first one might have come up as an ADA requirement, the higher 2.2 gallon per minute, which is often found in the private lavatories, whether they be in public spaces or private spaces.
Okay, thanks for the background on that. Next question comes from Michael. Oh, go ahead, Austin, if you had something else to add to that question.
The only other portion I was going to add, the bathroom sink faucet is for more of a residential setting, whereas everything else would be like commercial or public building.
So you have the lab. I don't know. Are you saying that the lab faucet would be used for commercial settings, and then bathroom would be for like a multifamily building or something?
Yeah, I think that is the distinction. But again, I don't know based on the original table whether that plays out. That's just from what we discussed in the green code hearings, my memory of it.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Austin. I was having trouble with the definitions in the private versus public too, and now I understand the distinction you're making, where lavatory is in the commercial space, and we're really suggesting a bathroom sink faucet for residential.
Very good. Michael, your question's next.
My question is with regards to the water flow for the urinal. I didn't do a research, but how many manufacturers are there that they're able to do 0.125 gallons per flash?
Great question. I don't have a number to provide you with. I can say there are a number of manufacturers that are actually moving towards flushless, waterless urinals. Just quickly pulling up, some Home Depot listings. I'm seeing American Standard, Sloan, Aquavantage, ProFlow, Toto. So Kohler, a lot. It seems to me, based on my knowledge of the sort of the biggest brands for urinals and toilets, that we've got our bases covered here. And the numbers are in the $250 to $600 range. That's what I'm seeing.
For the urinals? For the urinals,
right.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Next question comes from Mark.
First of all, let me, I guess the basic question to the proposer is, it is your intent. I think I already know the answer, but is it your intent? You're exceeding water sense. Is that correct?
That is correct. Some of
Okay.
these standards are exceeding water sense. Some of them
Okay.
are in line with water sense.
Val, just wanted to understand, yes, we all recognize that. And then weigh in and help answer some of the questions that were just coming about sinks. As we get into the how to make this enforceable, I think we will have some conversations on that. I've never put a sink in a bathroom in 30 years. It's lavatories are what goes in bathroom. The lavatory is a specific thing. A lavatory is what's used to wash hands. And I've put sinks in a whole lot of places besides kitchens. So I think that there is nothing wrong with the original language. In other words, a sink faucet at 2.2, we're now 1.5, and again, not a big deal. We do one issue that can come up in healthcare is when we're talking about an exam room sink, and we use that word specifically so we don't get hung up on lavatories. You do want a bit of water flow in an exam room sink. But it's been done with 1.5. The numbers that are quoted here are standard lead values, and we do that relatively all the time. So I'm not concerned about the values in here. And I would be concerned about the language, and I guess I'm trying to help you as a subject matter expert. I sink generally is understood by the industry, and lavatory is generally understood by the industry. Some of us tend to play some games with those terms, but it is what it is in the code, and I could play the same game with whether I needed a tempering valve for a place where you wash your hands. If I simply call it a sink, as an example, you're going to have to deal with that, Chuck.
So I see, just to make one quick point there, that there is an exception up above that table for clinical sinks. So to your point, and the
Well, a clinical, that's an entirely different thing. A clinical sink is where you take the bedpan and dump it in the hopper and flush it, because those come with like a 6-gallon.
Okay, and service sinks isn't covering.
Or actually, they're 4.5. They are 4.5 gallon. They used to be 6. That's exactly the issue. Yeah. Service sink is where you take your mop and.
Okay. There's a lot of different terms here. I'm comfortable with an update that keeps the intent of these, fixture efficiency limits, these gallons per minute, with your expertise, Mark, about how these fit into the definition of lavatory. I'll admit that I have some confusion around the sink versus lavatory definition. So I'm certainly open to that.
Okay, thank you. Shauna, you're up next.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, let me stop sharing so you have that ability.
Okay, I want to share my screen here to show you, hopefully you can see the 2021 code. And what I want to point out is that there's 2 tables here, and one of them has labs, kind of like you guys have listed, and then sink residential, sink service. And then the table that you're trying to amend, and this is a problem in the base code, not your proposal, right? Then it goes to labs, sink faucet. So I'm just wondering if there is a way, so you have sink faucet, if you make that your proposal to say more in line like this, sink residential versus your labs, since it's already kind of in line with this code, this seems to be what people understand. I have a lab, private, public. I also have a sink, a service sink or a residential sink, right? And so that seems pretty easy to understand, whereas maybe this sink faucet that's in the code existing, and now you're trying to say bathroom sink or whatever it was, maybe we could just use the terms that are used up here. That's just maybe make it a little easier with terms that are already in the code. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. Next hand up, Mark. Mark, your hand was still up. So let's go. Chuck, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you. And I guess my last clarification is the final line you've added kitchen sink. Is that intended to be a residential kitchen sink or a commercial kitchen?
Yes, residential kitchen sink.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Matt, go ahead.
So, Lindsay, has there been any research on the 1.1 gallon per flush water closets, in particular to double flush, right? So, reason I ask is that we've had experience going that low, only to realize that it is a nightmare and people flush multiple times, they clog, they're problematic. So to set that as the base code requirement in my mind, seems like it could produce a lot of unintended consequences. Has there been any research on that number?
Yeah, there are a lot, I would say a couple dozen, if not more, 1.1 gallon per flush water closets that are listed as EPA WaterSense certified with the EPA WaterSense label. So they have done efficacy testing on those water closets. I could maybe I can't put things in the chat, but there are a number at that level. And I believe, and maybe Austin can speak to this, the 1.1 or maybe even the 0.8 have been tested through Denver Water's pilot program. And this has been a part of the Denver Green Code.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say EPA WaterSense and then also MAP testing are the two things that you want to look for in toilets. I don't know if we want to include more language on that and say like a MAP rating above 800 or something. That comes down to amount of grams that it can consistently flush. So the 0.8 toilets that we've installed both through Mile High Youth Corps, our own WaterSense challenge, and now the system development charge rebate program, we always put in 0.8 gallon per flush toilets. And to date, we haven't had any consistent complaints about toilets failing. We've had one or two that had like a bad diaphragm, since those are pressure assisted toilets that had to be swapped out early on, but 2 out of several thousand is really nothing to worry about, I would say. And then the other issue that often comes up is drain line carry. We also haven't seen any drain line carry issues. Where drain line carry issues tend to happen is where you're plumbing out from the building out to the sanitary main line is too flat. So that is not necessarily a problem of the toilet. It is more a problem of what is in the ground. And yes, there are codes around that, but things happen. And that is no fault of the code. It's often people digging up properties or replacing things in their backyard, additions, things like that. So those are the two main ones. I can also try to add some links to studies if that's helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'm going to put Lindsay back on mute. And committee, now this is your time to have further discussion or to make a motion. Matt, go ahead.
So I guess, amongst the committee members, I'm hesitant to go beyond 1.28 with water closets, just knowing that with this being base code, this could have pretty far reaching implications. I understand there is testing out there. I would like to see that. I'd like to go through that as part of this decision to understand if this is something that maybe we're a little bit too conservative, maybe we're a little bit too afraid of it. In practicality, though, we've seen problems with this flow rate in the past. Now, maybe the designs have gotten better, but I have trouble with that particular number. So I don't think I could support this as written. I would move to update the water closet flow rate to 1.28 gallons per flush.
So, sorry, I'm doing this on the fly, converting to Word documents. So 1.28, and sometimes does not work when I convert.
This is updating the standards to be in alignment with what has been required by state statute since 2016.
The 1.28 is, right.
Yep.
Okay. There's a motion to amend the water closets from 1.1 to 1.28. Any other discussion?
Hey, Matt, was the complaints you received, did it matter whether or not it was a tank type water closet or a flush valve water closet?
The ones we were seeing were flush valve, but I can't really speak for both. I think our experience has been with 1.2 or 1.1 flush valve product. So.
Did you get a second on that?
I'll second it if not.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Michael, your hand's up next.
Just as a matter of discussion, I'm not going to make a proposal to change it. I just want to kind of like mention that on most hotel projects that we've done, once we put the 1.8 GPM, they for the shower heads is probably the #1 complaint on hotels, especially since they're not getting the 80 PSI on every floor. So most of the hotel operators, they just remove the aerator and it goes to a higher flow. So we had really good luck with 2 GPM and they will not change it. But anytime we did 1.8, they just took it out because on the guest, it's okay on apartments because they kind of get used to it. But on hotels, they once they start getting complaints and comments, they immediately switch to something higher. So I just wanted to part of the discussion, but I'm not going to propose to change it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Austin, your hand's up next.
Yeah, I was gonna say that a lot of the work that we do is in the tank type toilets as opposed to flushometer valve, or that sort of thing. Could we break, Matt, would you be willing to break water closet out to flushometer valve and tank type toilets so that we had the opportunity to discuss further whether they should both be at 1.28 or one could be at 1.1 and the other at 1.28?
Yeah, I think so. I think that'd be worth discussion.
Okay.
We were seeing come through the ceiling of this stuff, right? All this stuff is now coming back and that's what's swirling over this column. I called whoever did this call for.
Did I capture that correctly?
Yep, and then I would, if Matt is willing, have the water closet tank stay at 1.1, water closet flushometer valve be at how it's listed above.
Matt, what are your thoughts on that? You're on mute.
I guess this is different than what I motioned, so I'm not sure what the procedure is here. I think I'd feel comfortable with it at 1.28 across the board, but if we're reducing the rates, I'd like to. I feel better about it if I could see have a little more confidence in it is all. So.
Okay. So there is a motion from Matt to keep that 1.28, and it sounds like he was okay with adding the separate category, but leaving it at 1.28 for both categories. So Matt made that motion, and Mark seconded that. So unless either one of them and or both of them want to change that, then we would just keep it as the one category, water closet, at 1.28. So let me first ask Matt and Mark, are you okay with adding a second category and breaking water closet out from tank and flushometer valve?
I'm okay with that.
Yes.
Okay. And so then the question now becomes that Matt and or Mark, are either you against or both you want to keep those values the same at 1.28? Is that what I'm hearing? And you don't want to change those?
Yes, I do.
Okay. All right. So even though there's a motion to break it out into two different categories, we're still going to keep the motion is still to keep the same 1.28 gallons per flush. Just a point of clarification for everybody. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll call a vote on that amendment. So we are voting on breaking out water closet into two categories, one in tank and one with flushometer valve, with the change of 1.28 gallons per flush from the 1.1 gallons per flush that's proposed. All those in favor of that change, please raise your hand. I have 9. That's unanimous, so I won't go ahead and lower it. I won't ask for any others. You can go ahead and lower your hands. So that passes. Anybody want to have a new motion or want to have further discussion? Mark.
Yes, a point of discussion leading to a motion, and I'll just, the motion is aiming to get rid of the qualifiers of bathroom and sink and just make a single category of sink faucet. And 1.5 sounds like a valid number. That's always been good for the selections I've been involved with. My question is, and I guess I could have asked this of the proponent, what's meant by temporary override to 2.2 under kitchen sink? I'm not, is there a fancy faucet that gives you a boost mode? Is that it?
She did mention something about that, but since we're past the question period, yeah, we can't unmute her, but maybe Austin has some feedback on that.
Yeah, I can jump in. That is basically done to get like pre-rinse spray valves to a commercial kitchen standard. So those are often 2.2 to spray down dishes before they go through the wear washers and that sort of thing. And it also allows you to like fill pots more quickly for cooking if you have that captive reciprocal below it. Those are really the only two applications that I've seen needing a 2.2 gallon per minute.
But neither one of those fits the very broad category of kitchen sink faucet. There's a specific thing called a pre-rinse. And that wasn't mentioned here, which is I find interesting, because there are indeed water sense and lower values that are used in commercial kitchens for pre-rinse faucets. And there's such a thing as a pot fill faucet that's used usually right on the cooking lineup. And yeah, that's not a water waste. They're usually wide open. They're essentially a hose bib. Neither one of those are kitchen sink faucets. And if the idea is to make a your basic to allow for a residential sink that looks like a commercial sink to go along with your Viking range, well, that's something different. And probably not sure where to put that, but
Yeah, I think it's really just talking about the residential kitchen sinks, giving them an override for when you want to fill a pot.
oh, okay, residential now, that's a different, so I get it. That's the whole point though, is it's not very well defined. Like I said, if we do this, we have bathroom sinks and kitchen sinks. That means that break room sinks are unregulated. That means that the sink in a executive conference room is unregulated.
Yeah, I agree. I think Shauna showed us the underlying table is a bit confusing.
Right now, the code just says a sink faucet has to be at 2.2, right? And so if that means any sink, whether it's the bathroom sink or the kitchen sink, has to be at 2.2. I mean, if you read it that way, other than labs, any other sink has to be at a 2.2. That's a technical sink. So that's what the code says right now. You're trying to take it to spread it out and say, well, a bathroom sink. I guess my question is all bathroom sink residential, kitchen sink residential, or is that all kitchen sinks residential and commercial? It would be good to get some clarification, because right now it talks to all sinks are this. You're breaking it out. What is your real intent?
This is I would say that the word bathroom next to sink has only confused the issue. Prior to this, I know what goes in a bathroom. It's a lavatory. And therefore, if it was a private lav, associated with a residence or associated with an executive's washroom, then I could go as high as 2.2. But every other bathroom out there will have a lavatory in it. And I have two choices: one, half a quarter gallon of squirt, or half a GPM constant. It's never been confusing so far.
Okay. Any other discussion, or anybody want to make a motion? Is there a way that we can make it more clear if we put res at the end of the bathroom sink and then add another line for sink faucet? Would that be helpful?
This is the commercial code. It'd be dwelling unit. This is the commercial code.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's possible, but I think that's already covered in private lavatory. The word bathroom sink just does not, those two words don't belong together.
Okay. What if we delete that one and to go back to just sink faucet?
With that, I will make that motion then. I move to strike the word bathroom under sink faucet, and strike the entire line of kitchen sink faucet, just everything. The result is sink faucets, period, require 1.5 GPM at 60 PSI.
And I just want to point out that's a pretty big change, because you were
yes, it is.
A kitchen sink was allowed 1.8, and now it's saying all sinks will that kitchen sink now gets a 1.5. No, well, but in their proposal, right? In their proposal, they had a kitchen sink at 1.8 and other sinks at 1.5, and now you're saying all the sinks will get 1.5. So just making sure that you're noticing that you're going more stringent than their proposal.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's take this step by step, so we're not voting on everything at once. We can look at things one at a time. So in order to do that, let's leave kitchen sink unmodified at this point. And then the modification I'm suggesting is, in fact, perhaps the readability way would be to put kitchen sink first, and then other sink faucets is 1.5. That covers my concern that the sinks that are not in those two specific rooms are unregulated. So sink faucet, all other, or other sink faucets, either way is fine by me. Yeah, you're
I'm
doing
trying to make-
parentheses.
I'm trying to make the change, but because I basically made a Word document out of a PDF, it's not liking it. It's not letting me do it. So let me find another way maybe to do this. How about that?
And then I think
So-
to be consistent with some of the other verbiage in there, the descriptor is in parentheses. So sink, faucet, other than kitchen. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. The item for discussion next would I'd recommend that I leave the amendment at that so we can look at things independently. And then the discussion after that would be, do we want to define kitchen sink further and put if it's the intent for residential only, then do that. But then we've allowed commercial sinks to be unregulated. I mean, this is what right now it's not a big deal. Chicago and American Standard, all the commercial manufacturers indeed have culinary sink faucets that can be limited to 1.8 because I don't want to say 1.5. I think we've done that for lead projects. Designers, you might want to chime in on that.
Okay, so Mark has made a motion to modify the table to strike bathroom in the category bathroom sink faucet and make it sink faucets other than kitchen. And so that is the motion on the table right now. Is there a second? I'll ask a second time. If it doesn't get a second, then it fails. Is there a second on that motion, Austin? Okay, there is a second by Austin. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'll call it. Sorry, there is one. Chuck, go ahead.
So I guess my concern is we altered the intent of the proposal, because the intent of the original proposal was bathroom sink faucet, which all of us and all the designers and code enforcement understand that to be essentially a private lavatory. And so the original proposal required a private lavatory to have 1.5 GPM. However, the private lavatory will remain at 2.2. So I mean, I think we've altered the intent of the proposal. And I don't know, I'm okay with that because I think this makes more sense. But and I think we also need to clarify this is a residential or domestic style sink here, because I don't know if the proponent didn't indicate that this was intended for commercial kitchen. But then at that point, commercial kitchen would fall under this other sink faucet, which is less at 1.5, which sort of adds to the confusion as well. So I'm trying to wrap my head around all the different scenarios.
One thing I'd point out that the code does make some distinctions between lavatories and sinks. If I was to, and I don't, it's a lavatory, first of all. If you're washing your hands, it's a lavatory. If you're putting stuff in it and rinsing off, it's a sink. But I could game the system and call it a sink because I wanted this flow rate, or I could call it a lavatory because I wanted that flow rate. And the interesting thing might be that the lavatory at 2.2 GPM requires a 1.25 inch waistline, and the sink at 1.5 would require an 1.5 inch waistline, because again, that's what the plumbing code thinks of a sink, and lavatory is different.
Okay. Any other further discussion on this before we call a vote? Seeing none, I will call a vote for just changing that one section there by striking bathroom out of bathroom sink faucet and calling it sink faucets other than kitchen. All those in favor of that, please raise your hand. Seven, I see 8. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. B1. Okay, so that amendment passes. Now, is there another motion anybody wants to make? Austin, go ahead.
Can I make a motion to change lavatory private to 1.5 GPM at 60 PSI? So there is no gaming the system between them.
All right.
Okay, is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay. Any
Readily
discussion?
available.
I see no discussion. I'll call a vote on that. We're changing private lavatory from 2.2 to 1.5. All those in favor, please raise your hand. The 8, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 0. Okay, so that passes. All right, is there another motion out there? We'll get there. I know we will. Is everybody good with this one? Anybody not good with it? Now's your time to speak up. We can still make modifications, or we can approve or disapprove. Austin, go ahead.
I will make a motion to approve as written and modified.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mark seconds. Okay, there's a motion to approve as modified. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion and that there was a second, I'll call a vote. All those in favor as approving as modified, and those modifications are on the screen, please raise your hand. Seven, 8. Wow, there we go. I got 9. All right, it's unanimous. Go ahead and lower your hands. So this passes. Let me save these changes because the screen was a little funky there. But so it is a time check here of 5 minutes till. We don't have enough time to start another item of business there. So we got through 34.4. So we will pick up, I believe we only have one more hearing left. So thank you all for joining. No, we have more than one.
No, I don't think there are any left, are there? We only had 2 hearings for PMG.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right. My notes show 2 hearings. Sorry about that. So this is our final hearing. Christy, I don't know if you want to give us a farewell and kind of give us a synopsis on how the rest of these are going to be heard or how things are going to be processed. But I will say from my standpoint, I want to thank you all for joining us and taking your time and volunteering your time on this. It's been helpful and it's been great discussion.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add on that because I'm going to have to touch base with Eric Browning to find out the process forward. I suspect that for the remaining proposals, we will add some of what we've been doing for other I-codes, which are offline hearings, where we'll send out invitations to everybody, completely not mandatory to join us. But if you can join us and are interested in joining us, we would really love to have your input as we finish the conversation in a kind of less formal setting about the remaining proposals that we didn't get through. I'm 99.9% certain that that's what Eric will say.
Okay. Thanks, Christy, for that. And thanks again, everybody, for your time. I'll end the recording, but as usual, I'll stay on the line for any criticism, good, bad, indifference. But thanks again, everybody, for your time on this. It's been very helpful.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, and I wanted to
Thank you.
echo,
Thank you, Kevin.
I wanted to echo Christy and Kevin. I really appreciate everybody's